All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for day 2 of Aopa's 2022 Healthcare Ethics and Compliance Week. My name is Devin Bernard, and I'm the Assistant Director of Coding, Reimbursement, Education, and Programming here at Aopa. And I'm also being joined by our Director of Coding, Reimbursement, Education, and Program, Mr. Joe McTurnan. If you want to go ahead and say hello, Joe.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here and glad you're all with us today. Thank you.
Today's presentation will be focused on providing you with some key tips or ideas on how to ensure that your future or your current compliance plan is effective, or to ensure that it is doing what it's intended to do or what it needs to do. As we go along, some of the tips and ideas may seem to overlap or may appear to be a little bit redundant, but that's okay, as they're going to reinforce each other and provide tips on different aspects of your plan. Because as you know, your plan is not something that's an isolated document. You know, each aspect works together as a whole to accomplish its goals and your mission statement for compliance. You know, to put it differently, each aspect of your plan is going to build upon other existing parts, and those overlaps and things like that are going to be okay. Before we get into the tips for an effective compliance plan, it's a good idea to kind of talk about how we got here and what the current elements of a compliance plan are, or the 7 things that should be part of any good compliance plan. You know, starting way back, you know, we're going to go way back here in our time machines to 1999. The Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, or the OIG, created and released a document called the OIG's Compliance Program Guidance for Durable Medical Equipment, Prosthetic, and Orthotics Supplies Industry, which will become the framework for most compliance plans. And in this, they kind of identified over 40 areas of risk which should be addressed by your plan. Even though this document is, you know, going on 24 years old, or 24 years, the information and the guidance in it is still relevant. Then kind of jump forward to about 2010 or so. There was a section of the Affordable Care Act that stated that select suppliers and providers should establish a compliance program as condition of enrollment for Medicare and Medicaid. So even with this new update in 2010, the OIG document still stated that in order for any compliance plan to be effective, it should include the following 7 key elements or components. So this all started back in about 1999 and created these 7 key pillars or elements. Number 1 is the implementation of written policies and procedures and standards of conduct. So the first step in creating your compliance plan is the development of your company's written standards of conduct, or the broad values that you wish for your facility or company to follow. You know, for example, your desire to follow all state and federal regulations and to conduct your business in a professional and proper manner. The standards of conduct, you know, will then help you create and frame the specific written policies and procedures that are tailored to meet your company's needs, or in other words, the steps that you will follow to show your commitment to compliance. So the standards of conduct are your declaration of principle, and then the policies and procedures in turn spell out the actions that your company takes to fulfill those principles. The second element is the designation of a compliance officer. You must designate one employee to be the compliance officer, and they must serve as the primary point person for all compliance activities and questions. If possible, it's also recommended that you create a compliance committee whose duties would be to advise and help the compliance officer in implementing, updating, and enforcing your company's and your facilities' compliance programs, policies, and procedures, and standards of conduct. Next is the development of a training or education programs. The OIG compliance program guidelines kind of stated that the proper education and training of officers, managers, employees at all levels is a significant element of an effective compliance program. So you want to be sure that you have education and training programs in place that are not only used for new hires, but are also used for existing employees, and that these programs are routinely revamped to meet current needs or current guidelines. The type of education or training you want to provide is going to be up to you, such as just general compliance training that effectively communicates the requirements of your program, or that initial compliance training for new employees at or near the time of hire, and the annual refresher compliance training that highlights any new updates or changes or things like that. Next is creating a effective in creating an effective compliance program includes establishing open lines of communication. Your compliance program is expected to have open lines of communication with the purpose of receiving clarification about your company's policies and procedures, and to encourage the reporting of any potential areas of concern, or risk areas, in the realms of waste, fraud, or abuse, or things along those lines. An open door policy is going to ensure that all employees have access to the compliance officer or the committee if you have that function and ability, and then also through all levels of management. That good communication is important for all organizations, and how you achieve it will depend on the size and structures of your facilities and your company. What's going to be the most important is to identify what works best for you, and we're going to kind of cover some of those options and scenarios and some of the tips that we'll go over here in a little bit. Number 5 is the performance of internal audits in monitoring and risk assessments. Auditing and monitoring are necessary to ensure compliance with, CMS requirements and regulations, and to kind of identify, underlying compliance risks. This could include a combination of internal monitoring done by yourself and audits and external audit results, like, from TPE audits or RAC audits or things like that. Monitoring includes just regular operational reviews of your day-to-day functions to confirm or to ensure that you have an ongoing compliance happening. And then auditing includes formal reviews of your compliance against your set standards and policies and procedures. Risk assessments are going to be those baseline reviews of major compliance areas, of risk areas of fraud and abuse, to determine any possible risks to you. It should include areas of concern identified by CMS and the OIG, in that original document they created. Remember, that includes about 40 or so baseline areas to kind of look at, to look at and to review. And then, once you've done your risk assessment, anything you consider a high risk or something that might be harmful or impact your company, that's what you want to kind of focus on then in your policies, procedures, and auditing going forward. So the goal of the audit program is to monitor ongoing operations so as to ensure that policies and procedures are being observed, and that any necessary corrective action can be taken immediately. The sixth element or sixth pillar is to ensure consistent enforcement of standards and discipline. Your disciplinary policies must be clearly written and should be widely publicized and readily available to all staff. The consequences of non-compliance and any subsequent disciplinary action must be consistently applied and enforced. So all employees should be subject to the same types of disciplinary action for similar offenses. For example, each employee could be subject to varying levels of discipline depending on the circumstances, such as, additional training, being written up or getting verbal warnings, being demoted, being fired, or anything along those lines. The last element is to make sure you have the ability to have prompt responses to issues. When vulnerabilities are identified as a result of a risk assessment or an internal audit or your monitoring activities, then corrective action must be taken in response to those potential violations. So once you've identified something or someone has reported a potential violation in your codes of conduct or any other areas of non-compliance, regardless of the size of it or the scope of it, you must have set procedures in place that allow you to rapidly assess the issue and correct the action through the proper channels. So what are the benefits of following and implementing these 7 elements besides having a good working and effective compliance plan in place? You could possibly see benefits such as faster payments of your claims, reduced billing mistakes, improved audit results from like the TP audits or the RAC audits and the such, higher success rates in your appeals, avoiding potential areas of fraud, waste, and abuse, and many other types of things. So following these 7 pillars and setting up that effective compliance plan does have long-term benefits for you, your facility, and your company. All right, so on to the tips here. So when creating or updating your compliance plan, including your policies and procedures, your code of conduct, or even your mission statement, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the abundance of rules, regulations, and policies and guidelines that are kind of out there and about how you are to operate, the function, the code, to bill. With all this information, you could be very tempted to try and include it all or cover every small detail of compliance, including phrases from policies, legalese, jargon, or snippets from regulations and things like that. However, that's not always the best thing or not always ideal. It's kind of best to remember the acronym or the old adage of KISS or KISS. Keep it simple, stupid, or more politely, keep it simply simple. The best, most effective compliance plans are simple and easy to read. They're concise and straightforward. If that plan is long or it contains difficult language or like legalese and jargon, employees are less likely to read it or less likely to follow it. So you don't need to make the policies and procedures complex. They should be simple statements such as, we attempt to verify any payers which may be primary to Medicare, or something like, we do not submit duplicate claims. Your codes of conduct can be very simple as well. Simple codes of conduct are, Aopa O&P adheres to the following principles. We bill only for services rendered, and in an accurate and timely fashion. We will obey all applicable federal, state, and local laws, and we will not tolerate behavior that violates these principles, right? So keep everything as quick and digestible little nuggets that can be referenced quickly when needed, and then you may use your separate education sessions, memos or your trainings to highlight some of the more complex topics, or if you want to go into more detail about a certain policy or procedure, that's when you can get into those details. Keep it simple to start with and let the details follow later. I don't have it here on the slide, but it goes along with keeping it simple. Be sure to also keep it friendly and fair. All compliance plans should spell out the consequences of not following the policies and procedures because everyone benefits when those rules are clear and easy to understand. So not just your mission statement or your codes of conduct should be simple. Everything within that plan should be simple as well. All right. So congratulations to you. You've written and created the greatest, the simplest, and most effective plan. Now what do you do? Can you just place that plan on the shelf and forget about it? No, your plan must not collect dust or be neglected. It should be reviewed and updated on a regular basis. It is important to review the compliance plan every year. This is your time for making revisions to items in the plan that did not work in the previous year, or increase efforts on action items that did work. You must also upgrade your plans and policies as regulations and guidance change. For example, if you have a current policies and procedures and compliance plan in place, did you update it to include information about competitive bidding and prior authorization? Are you planning to update your policies and procedures to include new information on the codes which are going to require, face-to-face appointments and written orders prior to delivery? How often you review the plan is up to you, but I would highly recommend you do it at least once a year. And then during that review, as we said, you identify the things that didn't work or are no longer relevant to your company and your plan. Be sure your plan only covers what you need. Do not add those extra burdens to you. If you notice areas of concern over the past year, maybe you update the plan to focus on those areas for the upcoming cycle or year. If you've noticed that you're having a lot of issues or problems with SNF and inpatient billing, maybe you review that part of the policy and see if it needs updating or clarification, and maybe you provide more education and training on that section. There are some good tools out there that can kind of help you test your core plan and see if it needs some updating and see what works and what might not be working. There's a document called the Measuring Compliance Program Effectiveness Resource Guide, which was created by industry compliance experts and professionals along with the OIG. This work group came up with a list of about over 400 metrics or what to measure in a compliance plan and how to measure those items. There's also the Department of Justice's tool they use for the evaluation of a corporate compliance program, and then there's going to be links for these tools at the end of the presentation. So there are things out there to kind of help you do this yearly update and checking. You don't always have to create and write your own plan. It's okay to use outside materials and resources, even hire someone to create a plan for your facility and organization. However, you want to be careful that that plan is right for you or it is what you need. In other words, a compliance plan is not always a one-size-fits-all concept. What works and is good for you may not work for your company down the street. You want to make sure that the plan is meeting your needs and addresses the issues that are important to you and your facility. And you want to be sure that's not putting any undue burdens on you or tying your hands in ways that you may not have expected or anticipated. If the plan says you'll audit, let's say 100 claims a month, but you only have the ability to audit 20, you're adding that extra work. You're putting too much work onto you and your staff. Or if the plan says you create a compliance committee, but you only have 5 people on staff, that's not going to be really practical for you. As we stated, that original OIG document listed and suggested over 40 areas of concern related to fraud and waste and whatnot, which are to be addressed by a compliance plan. However, not all 40 of those areas would apply to O&P billing or daily O&P operations, but a template or outside vendor may include all 40 topics. So if you're using those templates or outside vendor, be sure to review it and read the final product before accepting it and implementing. Don't just accept it and put it on the shelf. The last thing you want to do is someone come in like ABC, BOC, National Supplier Clearinghouse or someone like that, and they pull down your compliance plan, start looking at it and asking you questions about it, but you have no idea what's in it. That kind of doesn't make you look too good, and it doesn't make it seem like you have any desire or any plans in place to be compliant or things along those lines. So just be careful when you're using those templates and outside resources. So that kind of takes care of what I have here. I'm going to go ahead and now turn it over to Joe, if you want to go ahead and Joe.
Thanks, Devin. It doesn't look like I have the ability to take over control of your screen. So if you would just do me a favor and just advance the slides as we move through, and I will let you know when to advance them. So, let's talk now. Let's continue talking about some of the things that help you to create and maintain. Operative term is to maintain an effective compliance plan. And one of the things that's really important to remember is that I think Devin already covered that. I'm sorry that one size does not fit all. So forgive me. You give me a slide and I read it. So so let's talk about communication. One of the most important parts of any compliance plan is communicating effectively, and that goes both ways. It's not only communicating downward from your compliance team down to your employees, but it also involves communication coming back up. It also involves to how you communicate your compliance plan, how you receive information, and then how you then communicate that information. So it works two ways, really two ways. So it's internally and externally. So when you're talking about taking information in, how do you take in information as to what may be going on from a compliance standpoint, where you may have exposure, and how to make sure that information is conveyed in a way where it is secure and where employees feel comfortable and are less likely to be concerned that there's going to be retribution for reporting that. So one way you can do that is you can create internal hotlines where employees can report potential compliance violations, and you can also make sure that you are communicating to your managers and your supervisors exactly what your process is when somebody down the chain comes to them with a compliance concern, and how to properly handle that. As far as outbound communication, this is communication coming from your compliance team to your employees primarily. You want to make sure that there is good quality information that is maintained in a way that it can be archived, can be viewed at various times. So things like internal company memos are important. Regular compliance newsletters. If you can create a compliance-based newsletter for your teams, that's going to be really, really helpful, because people, when they get that information, they say, hey, okay, we know that this is tied to our compliance team. This is coming from our compliance program, and that it's coming down to folks within the organization, or coming down from folks within the organization, that is valuable to help us to make sure that we understand what that compliance program is all about. Email communication. Obviously, in today's environment, email is so much a part of all of our everyday lives that communicating compliance issues through email chains, through email channels, through a defined process of communicating via email is super important when building your compliance plan. Don't underestimate the value of those posters. Everybody jokes about the posters that you see, with the cat hanging from the tree. That's encouragement, and all the aspirational posters. But you can use posters in your facility, in your practice, in your business that really do promote compliance and effective compliance. Things like putting the telephone number for your internal compliance hotline, putting procedures in place on a poster that's sitting in, say, a break room or a kitchen area, so that folks do know, if they do have a concern, that there is a channel where they can send that through. As we continue to operate in a much more virtual environment than we used to, and as folks are more and more working remotely, there's technology out there, and Microsoft Teams is just one example of that technology. But you can build cloud-based quote unquote teams that will allow you to effectively communicate compliance related issues. So these are all things that are helpful. As Devin said on the last slide that he presented, it's not a cookie cutter way of doing it. So what works for you may not work for your competitors. It may not work for your colleagues. You have to determine what is best for your company and how to best develop and implement your compliance plan going forward. So I do have, Devin was able to give me control, so I can advance the slides now. Thank you, Devin. I appreciate that. So continuing on the communication front, when we are talking about effectively communicating, it comes back to the KISS theory, the keep it simple, stupid theory, or the keep it simple solution, or however you want to say it nicely. I tend to go with the traditional KISS format. But you want to basically distill what is very, very complex information that you might find in a 300-page Federal Register notice. You want to distill that down through your compliance team into very, very clear, very concise, very understandable terms, so that your employees know exactly what it means, how they need to respond to it, and what your plan is from an implementation standpoint. So part of the role of a good compliance team is to really take that complex regulatory gobbledygook and turn it into something that makes sense to the folks on your staff, so that they understand exactly what the requirements are and what they can do when they have a compliance concern. You want to encourage your employees, when there's a question, ask. So many times employees run into compliance problems simply because they didn't ask a question. They felt it was something that they were going to be ridiculed for, they were going to be belittled on. Encourage your employees to always come to you with concerns. It is so much better if they come to you for clarification than if they make a decision that is inappropriate or incorrect because they were concerned or afraid to come to you for clarification and guidance. Okay. It's important that when that big regulation does come down and it's compliance-based, then you then distill it and you take it down to the core of what it means and what your staff is expected to do with it. You then have to effectively communicate that so that they know exactly what their responsibility is, whether they're a supervisor, whether they are not a supervisor. The hierarchy has to be very, very clearly outlined. And then it's so important for an effective compliance plan and for communication that there is almost always a direct channel, not always the first channel, but there is always a direct channel to somebody on the compliance team who has the authority to make decisions. So whether that's through a hotline, whether that's through an open door policy for the chief compliance officer for your organization, doesn't matter if you have 3 employees or you have 3,000 employees. There has to be a defined, communicated, effective means of direct communication to folks on the compliance team that have the authority to make decisions. So that's super important in developing effective communication of the compliance program that you create that's specific to your company. All right, so another key tip is making sure that roles are defined. So there are multiple parts of an effective compliance plan. And some of those roles are appropriate to be handled by the senior officers of the corporation. Some of them are appropriate to be handled by folks on the compliance team that might be more mid-level management. And then there's a responsibility of every single employee of your organization to understand and know what their role is in building and creating and implementing an effective compliance plan. So, the heavy lifting, the big global kind of overall compliance program responsibility, that really should fall on somebody in a senior management role, whether it's a chief compliance officer, whether it's a director of compliance, or even a senior manager of compliance, somebody that should ultimately have relative authority to make decisions that are related to implementing and ensuring that your compliance plan is being followed. That includes the power to enact change when necessary. So that is a person that should have relative autonomy, which is why they should have a fairly senior role in the organization. Okay, they should have input and they should have final say on developing and making recommendations to either the board or to the absolute senior managers, senior management, as far as what the disciplinary procedures are should there be a violation of compliance. And those obviously are going to be scaled depending on the nature of the violation. But that the compliance officer, that high-level, heavy-lift compliance person, should have the authority to at least recommend what the disciplinary process should be. Okay, this does not have to be an individual. You can have a compliance committee. This is especially relevant if you have a larger organization. If you don't want to necessarily have all your eggs in one basket, you could then create a compliance committee that would report findings through to the chief compliance officer for the organization. What you should not have is you should not have all of this responsibility. Typically, now if you're a very small organization, this may not be the case, but it typically should be isolated to a degree from the CEO, the CFO, the major, the COO of the company. You want to have this as almost an equal role that's really focused on compliance and building an effective compliance plan. Okay. The second part of that of building an effective compliance plan is having all of your regular everyday employees, whether they be managers, whether they be technicians, whether they be practitioners, whether they be administrative staff, whether they be folks that are not clinical in nature and are laborers even. If you have folks that are simple laborers and don't have a lot of interaction in your business itself, they still are part of the implementation of an effective compliance plan, and they still have a role. Everybody has a role in building and maintaining an effective compliance plan. It's so important that everybody understands what those roles are and how to operate within that compliance plan in order for it to be effective and viable. Okay. I went too far. Sorry. Let's see here. So a couple more tips. You want to be proactive, not reactive. The last thing you want to do is you do not want to be putting out fires when compliance is involved. I know sometimes it is really, really hard to not be in that reactive state, but it is important that you be as proactive as possible. These are why you are constantly doing things like your risk analysis. These are why, as part of your compliance plan, you are developing and creating audit processes in advance. Because trust me, folks, you want to find out what your weaknesses are, and you want to know what your potential exposure is before somebody else comes to you with it. You do not want to get an audit and say, okay, we've discovered that for 3 years you've been making the same mistake over and over and over again, because now not only do you have a compliance issue, but now you have potentially a revenue issue if you are forced to pay a bunch of money back on claims that are now going to be denied because there was a process that was broken that resulted in either T's not being crossed or I's not being dotted, or in the worst case, outright fraud. You want to make sure that you're discovering these issues and these problems as soon as possible, so that the ultimate impact of these issues is going to be lessened as much as possible. And that's where having an effective compliance plan comes into play. If you have regular risk analysis being performed, if you have regular internal audits being performed, the chances of you discovering compliance issues on your own and being able to address them and handle them on your own terms as opposed to somebody else's is going to be much, much better. You want to be honest with your results. So if you find in a compliance audit that you have an exposure, you do not want to sweep that exposure under the rug. You want to make sure that you are honest with yourself with the results, as well as any affected parties, whether it's patients, whether it's payers, etc. Trust me, it may be a bitter pill to swallow in the short term, but once you start to hide and cover up now not only are you not operating within probably the terms of your own compliance plan, but now you might have inadvertently put yourself out of the abuse arena and into the fraud arena, which could be have significantly higher consequences to you and to your company. So you want to make sure that you're proactive whenever it is feasible, whenever it is possible. When you do identify a potential issue, you need to very quickly, excuse me, as part of your compliance plan, have specific channels on what your response is, whether it is an immediate refund of potential overpayments, whether it is simply re-education of your staff. You want to make sure that you have policies and procedures in place through your formal compliance plan that outline very, very specifically what your typical course of action is when you identify a compliance issue. Okay, so don't panic. We have a very, very natural human tendency when something goes wrong to throw our hands up in the air and run screaming for the room. You will not be the first person or company or the last company to discover problems. And the fact that you have an effective compliance plan in place is probably a good thing when you do. But don't overreact. There is always a solution. It may not always be one that you like, and it may not always be one that doesn't have significant impact on your bottom line. But you want to make sure that you follow your plan, you follow your procedures that you worked so hard to put in place. If you panic, if you overreact, and you start shredding documents and you start burning the house down because you don't want to get caught, trust me, folks, A, you are not putting yourself in a better position, and B, you are not following the plan that you worked so hard to put together, and it is not going to end well. So make sure that you evaluate what's going on when you have a compliance issue, that you take your plan into consideration. You have worked hard to develop it. You have processes in place. Now is the time to follow those processes, follow those plans, follow those procedures, and trust those results, okay? And don't make changes on a whim. When you are considering a change to your compliance plan, talk about, amongst your senior management, talk about why it's necessary, what needs to be done, how it will best impact, and how it will effectively make your plan better before you just make a change to make a change. Sometimes change is not always good just for the sake of making a change. Not everything has to be fixed. The old saying is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, evaluate your plan on a regular basis. Make changes when necessary, but don't make change just because you think it's time for a change. That's not the right reason. So you don't want to make changes without having a thorough evaluation of what they are, what it means to make them, and how to best implement those changes. So that's another tip. All right. So we're getting towards the end here. So tips for creating a culture. You always want to create culture within your workplace, within your organization, that tells people and makes people understand that, hey, it's okay to report issues with compliance. You are not going to be fired because you've made a legitimate report and a legitimate concern about a compliance issue. Even if it turns out to not be accurate, folks have to be comfortable and have to feel safe in making their concerns known. So it starts now, and it has to be a priority of your compliance team to make sure that folks understand that there is a role for them, and that compliance has a role in your organization, and it is taken seriously. One of the ways to do this is to include something in your mission statement about compliance. Okay, Aopa O&P strives to maintain complete and full compliance with federal with all federal and state regulations and laws. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here. But if you make compliance a priority in your culture of your organization, it becomes intertwined with who you are, and it becomes part of your corporate identity. Okay, and it's very, very important to create that culture in order to have effective compliance plans and procedures. Get everybody involved. Make it part of the annual review process if you want. Talk about compliance on a regular basis with every single employee of your company. Make sure they understand that it is a value, that it is important, and it is something that the company takes very, very seriously, and it will become second nature. Okay? Compliance does not have to be boring. It does not have to be threatening. It does not have to be the Grim Reaper coming down and punishing. Compliance can be fun. That's kind of there's your inspirational poster for your break room. Compliance is fun. No, but seriously, I mean, turn compliance into a game at some of your meetings. Have compliance Jeopardy and give out gift cards, give out prizes. Make people get excited about being educated on what your compliance plan is, what it means, and how to work within it. Okay, it does not have to be the dry, boring, scary thing that it traditionally has been. It's not always about punishment. It is about doing the right thing and having a healthy company culture in existence. Alrighty, so this is a little bit of our commercial here, but Aopa does have a lot of resources that are available for your use when it comes to compliance. If folks are not aware of the Aopa Co-Op, it has been around for a couple of years now, and it is continuing to grow. It is a really, really valuable online resource that basically has everything you want to know about O&P. It's run by Aopa. We bring folks in through memberships. As part of your Aopa membership, you have access to it. You can communicate with each other. You can communicate with the Aopa staff. It's an ability to post information. So the co-op is a great resource. If you're looking for a template, a guideline, a kind of a guidebook to building an effective compliance plan, Aopa just recently revamped our compliance handbook that is available through our bookstore. Will help you step by step to build a good and effective compliance plan that you can tailor for the individual needs of your organization. There's lots of resources out there. The Aopa staff, Devin and I, are always available to talk about compliance issues. Ashley White, our colleague, is always available to talk about compliance issues. But talk within your own organization. Your own organization should have resources available as well to help employees understand what the compliance program is, how it is tailored for your organization, and how it best meets the needs of your individual company. Okay. So there are some federal resources, both through DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, the OIG, which is a division of the Department of Health and Human Services. They all have resources available for compliance. Now, you say the words or you say the initials OIG, and everybody immediately cringes and pulls back and says, whoa, this is something that's not good. But they do have resources that are generally based that will help you understand how to best measure your compliance and how to build a compliance plan. So even though they are kind of the police of the Medicare program, and when reports come out of the OIG, they are not usually complementary in nature. They do have significant resources available to folks that will help you to build and understand the importance of an effective compliance plan. So the OIG website can be found on the DHHS website. So we encourage you to go there and check out those resources as well. Okay, so like I said, we've talked about Aopa resources. There is also the HCCA, which is the Healthcare Corporate Compliance Association, I believe, but their website is hcca-info.org. We actually used to partner with them on Aopa's corporate compliance, healthcare compliance week, but we've gone out on our own now. But they are still a valuable organization. They do have a lot of really good resources, most of them at no cost, where folks can go to get some good general information about building effective compliance plans. And then again, like I said, the OIG is always a good resource as far as building and understanding the importance of compliance in healthcare and why an effective compliance plan is beneficial. Covered the Aopa resources, our website, our compliance guide, the co-op. We do have a code of conduct on our website as well. So, for some reason, Devin, can you advance that slide? There we go. So I do not have access to the questions panel, but Devin does. So I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Devin, and we are both happy to take and answer any questions that you all may have today.
Thank you, Joe. If you have if you have any questions, feel free to kind of type them into the questions box. And don't forget to press send once you're done typing, or you can use the raise your hand to ask your questions verbally. As people sit there and stew on everything they just kind of learned and thinking about possibly what they want to ask. Some quick other housekeeping. If you go to the handouts tab on the control panel that's on your screen when you logged in, you will see a handout associated with this presentation that you can download. It's a copy of the slides, and it will include those links that Joe just talked about there. And also as a reminder of during this week, the Aopa Compliance Guide is on sale to coincide with the Compliance Week. And a new feature with that is once it is purchased, it is automatically linked to your co-op account. So I'm not really seeing anything come through here, Joe. But once again, if you have some follow-up questions at any time, you can always feel free to kind of ask them out. And you can always follow up with us. We've got one question here. Rule of thumb for amount of dollars per staff to commit to compliance. It's a good question, and I'm not quite sure I would have a direct answer for it. It's kind of dependent on, the size of your company and, areas that you might see as risk or things that you might see as important. Joe, do you have any insight as to what a rule of thumb for the amount of dollars to staff to commit to compliance?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't, and I would be hesitant to say that this is our is our quote unquote budget for compliance. You obviously want to make sure that you are investing resources well, but I don't know that I would say that we're going to invest, X dollars per month per employee in building an effective compliance plan. It doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. It doesn't have to be a terribly expensive venture. But I don't have a number, and B, I would be really, really hesitant to suggest that a number is really even a good idea, just because it's such it's a unique company-specific process.
Next question here would come in is opinion of working with manufacturers and their compliance team specifically for things like microprocessor needs and high ticket items. The manufacturers like, Audits and OSER, their compliance teams can offer some very helpful guidance for you, but it's kind of along the same lines of when it comes time to select coding and billing, it does finally fall onto your shoulders, but using them as a resource is a great tool, and it is a good idea to, they have the resources there to help you.
So the only thing I would add to that, Devin, is yeah, I mean, the manufacturers are an excellent source of resource for documentation and for strategy on getting, having success in getting their products reimbursed and whatnot. What I would be cautious of is when you build your compliance plan, if you have policies and procedures that are not in line with some of that advice, you don't want to have inconsistency. So you don't want to have, policies and procedures that you follow when you're dealing with mechanical needs, and then based on manufacturer information, a complete and total set of policies and procedures for microprocessor needs. So it's more about being consistent across your policies and procedures from a compliance standpoint. But there's no harm at all in accepting reimbursement help and strategy help from manufacturers who know their products, who know the history of payment patterns, and as long as you are using that information accurately to describe and to help your patients, and you're not using information that does not necessarily apply to your patient's situation, I don't see that as a compliance concern at all. You should be fine.
The other side of that is also, a lot of manufacturers will also release, tidbits or information that kind of provide you some guidance, and those are good to kind of look at and review as well, because they might mention something that you might not be aware of, that you might want to research to make sure it's something that you need to include into your plan, or if they provide you information that might seem different than what you know, it's always a good idea to kind of use that as a guidepost to kind of, do some re-education as well. All right, sorry here, I'm scrolling through to try and find some more questions. Please bear with me. How do you find good compliance officers? Oof, that's a good HR question.
You pick them off. You pick them off the compliance tree. That's the easy answer, right?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that one. It's kind of same as how do you find a good orthotist, or how do you find a good biller or a good prosthetist? You kind of have to kind of find someone that has that knack or knowledge for it, or desire to want to learn, to kind of get into it. In your early stages of trying to identify one person to be that compliance officer, that might be one of the times that you maybe start out with a committee, and then kind of see who kind of rises out of that committee that can kind of step up to be your compliance officer.
So then the only thing I'll add there is a compliance. If somebody is going to serve as your compliance officer, they have to have the respect of your staff. They have to be someone that is seen as having a very high level of integrity. So they have to have that general view of being a person of integrity. And they do have to have a significant amount of experience, either within compliance directly or within the O&P arena, so that they have a full understanding of the workings and the ins and outs of how to maintain and ensure compliance. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody from within O&P. You can go out and hire someone that may have very, very good compliance-based experience in another industry, with the understanding that there's going to be a learning curve. But it's not someone that you hire typically, right out of college or right out of high school. There has to be a good amount of real-world experience, in that position, and then that person would have to be held within high regard within your organization if you're going to expect folks to, treat them and understand their role as a person of high integrity with high responsibility for compliance.
And don't forget, as you can kind of use the job boards to kind of ask for job postings for this. This is another time of, the Aopa OMP community is a good place to kind to log in there and ask for anyone's recommendations for, good compliance officers using the, HCCA, the Healthcare Corporate Compliance Association. They could be a resource to try and find those people that Joe mentioned that have that training or background in it, but there will always be that need for a little bit of internal training to get them familiar with OMP, as since that is a very small and niche topic, as you well know. All right, it's not looking as if I have any more coming through here. I'd like to say, thank you for attending today's webinar and presentation. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us here at Aopa. And Joe, I'll turn over to you to see if you have any final closing comments.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank everybody for spending about an hour with us today, and hopefully there's value here. And we really appreciate everybody participating in Aopa's Healthcare Compliance and Ethics Week. And make sure you're looking for that question of the day for your chance to win a gift card. So we're giving out a gift card every day. We have more webinars, free webinars this week that you can participate in, and schedule is available on our website. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Yes, and those upcoming ones are tips on social media and tips for compliance with ABC and BOC, and to get those weekly or those daily questions, that's to log into the OMP community, and this is a way to try to make us create that culture of compliance to make it fun for you guys. But once again, thank you, and we will talk to everyone later.